Hi, everyone. It's time again for Mustard Hub Voices Behind the Build. In these episodes, we speak with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat. My guest today is Summer Miller. Summer Miller helps businesses navigate change and growth without leaving people behind. Through her work as an advisor, educator, facilitator, and speaker, she helps leaders and teams integrate people-centered practices and design to support their growth strategy. Summer holds a doctorate in organizational leadership and teaches master's courses through the University of Minnesota and the University of Denver. She's a lifelong learner with a passion for building capability and confidence in others. Welcome to Behind the Build, Summer.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, the most important thing first, you're a music lover like me.
I didn't know we had that in common. That's awesome.
That's where I spent the majority of my early career, actually, on the jazz circuit, playing music all over the place. What kind of stuff is your favorite? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you also arrange music.
I do. So I started in college, I have a degree in a Bachelor of Music degree. So I focused on composition and arranging, and I love jazz arranging. So that's awesome. I would say early on, I did a lot of vocal jazz arranging. So my instrument was voice. I play acoustic guitar now, but that's what I did early on. Now, mostly it's me and my guitar because that's a little easier with life and kids and
Yeah,
all the
right.
things. But
I love
yeah,
that. So we share that in common. I was a jazz composition major, so we are simpatico. Um, well, your passion for, people-centered experiences, which is a philosophy I can totally get behind. Where did this passion come from? I'm guessing it's something that has grown throughout your career.
I think so. I probably would have called it different things earlier on, but it was this idea of, I think, first wanting to understand what makes people tick, like what helps people be at their best. What do people need to navigate hard things? Some of that you learn through going through the pain of it. This
Yeah.
didn't go well. What could we have done? Or this didn't feel good. What should have been here? So, and I'm a problem solver. I think a lot of us are in HR or HR adjacent spaces. So for me, it was really just trying to dig at that and understand it, which made me, I'm kind of nerdy. So I just kept learning and talking to people. And sometimes you learn that through assessments, through schooling, and all of those things. But for me, it was wanting to develop people and help them be at their best. I started that in the sales space in banking and then just continued it on in pretty much every job I've had since.
Super interesting, like winding path, I would say, especially starting out in music and then kind of going in that direction. You built a whole business around getting people to focus on people. I mean, you're the founder and principal at SDM Integrative Consulting, and I'd love to kind of hear what took you into that consulting world and maybe what inspired you to launch, this consultancy and run your own firm.
I think it's one of those things. I never dreamed of owning a business or running a business. I was in banking for 25 years and all different types of roles. But I think the common thread was the people centered piece and consulting. So I led consulting teams within a company and consultative
Okay.
practice. And in a lot of cases, I was teaching HR professionals how to be consultative. So there's kind of those two things in common. And I started thinking about, well, now that I know I need a new adventure, I want to test drive some things. So I tried just doing some HR consulting. And I realized that I can do this, but what I really love is helping people focus in on the people side. How do you create the right conditions for people to navigate hard things or to support your business growth? And that's where I kind of married together the things I love. So it's consulting, it's people centered, and it's really helping design for humans. And that's my happy place, right? So
Yeah.
bringing that all together has been a real joy for me, but it was not my life's design. It wasn't this master plan. It was just kind of an evolution.
I love that design for humans. And I think I want to come back to that idea because I want to eventually get to talk about technology. And that's, I think, a big part today, right, of
Mhm.
HR, of all the different things that we do to help inspire our teams or motivate our teams, also measure our teams and performance and things like that. And some of these systems that are so popular don't always feel like they're designed for humans. um, Before we get there, tell me about the services that you provide.
So I play in a couple different spaces. So in my business, I do a lot of change advising and education. So what that looks like is working usually with executive teams to help
Okay.
them think differently about what people need in times of change and growth. So some of that's building the muscle, and I use neuroscience to support that. So why do people need certain things, and how can you create those conditions? And then I work with people leadership teams kind of through an organization to continue to build that muscle. That's usually some education and then some ongoing advising to help them integrate the things we've talked about. I also do organization design consulting, and that's still people centered, but it's how do you design your organization to support your growth? There's a lot involved in that. Technology is a piece of that, but there's a lot of people practices, compensation, how we reward people. Um, all of the things that you're doing really involve people and systems. So it's making sure all of those things point to your strategy. So those are my two main spaces.
Are there overlaps between a lot of the things that you do and that you teach and you consult on and, for example, like EOS?
I would say I know a lot of EOS people because sometimes they'll identify a gap and there is a need to bridge that gap through org design. But maybe that implementer is not diving that deep. So they can, for example, I had a client where they recognized that their president was the only person who could sit in the sales accountability seat, but that wasn't his space. But there was no one else identified that could be there. And so in that case, I came in to help them think through the org design of how their sales vertical, how should they build this? How should they scope that role and make sure that they were positioned to support their go to market? So there's things like that where EOS was the starting point.
Yeah.
That company said, we need to have great systems to govern how we operate to help guide us. But that uncovers some things that are missing, right? There's always
Yeah.
some gaps that you find, and I help to bridge the gaps. So I would say but that could be any operating system, right? EOS is one of many approaches, but I think that that's a great place for people to start is looking at how are we integrating all of the things it takes to run this.
Yeah. So, tell me about your customers. You don't have to tell me exactly who they
Yeah.
are, but give me a picture of the customer. What makes them come to SDM? Are there problems that you're obsessed with solving for them specifically? Aside then, obviously, from the services that you do, but some real, I guess, real world examples.
I would say if people are coming to me for help with change, they've usually heard me speak somewhere. That's kind of the most frequent thing.
Okay.
And they're feeling the pain of change fatigue, burnout, disengagement. They're trying to do big things, but they have a reluctant workforce. And it's not that people don't care, but sometimes they're just weary. Sometimes it feels like things are happening to them and not with them. And that's the piece I help people turn around. So if anyone relates to that, that's my space. That's what I help people with.
I think it just in normal, well, maybe it doesn't have to be normal, but in it's a growing pain. I think that a lot of organizations find themselves in. Uh, um, are there things that you see the leaders that you work with just getting wrong time and time again, or that they're blissfully unaware of?
I think most often what I see, I mean, almost everything related to change and growth comes down to communication. And there's a lot of really beautiful communication plans that are almost completely one way. So that's like the cascading communication through a company. You can be
Top down.
saying, yeah, top down, one way communication. that is more efficient. You can mass market solution that, right? You can say,
Mhm.
we're going to have a big call and an email blast and all
Yeah.
of these things. But what people are often missing is a two-way channel. And when people are going through change and growth, they have our brains desire autonomy. We want our fingerprints on it. And so if you're in a one-way conversation, it's not really even a conversation, it's a monologue, right?
Yeah.
And
I
that
guess
doesn't
so.
feel good to anyone
No.
unless you're at the
No.
theater and that you expect it, right?
Yeah.
So in the workplace, you want it to be two-way, even if you don't know how to articulate that. Without it, something's missing. And that creates uneasiness in the workforce. So I'd say that's the thing most often that I feel is missing.
When they come to you, obviously they have a million questions. Do you feel like they're asking the right ones? Inevitably, a lot of this comes down to people, to communication. I would imagine a lot of them are coming with problems relating to other things and maybe missing the point that many of them are people problems, and there are different ways to solve these that maybe they're not quite focused on. Do you see that as being common?
Yeah, I think that often there's kind of a lot of pointing fingers. There's a lot of trying to attribute the problem to something. It's often a symptom of the problem. And I think that happens with consulting in general. There's pain that you maybe feel or see, and you think you know why, but you haven't looked under the hood or really understood the root cause. So I think that happens an awful lot with org design. You think this just isn't working. It must be that we have the wrong technology. It must be that we have the wrong system or the wrong people. That's often not really what it is. Or maybe that's a part of what it is, but it's not the whole story. I see that an awful lot with change too, but especially when I'm doing org design, looking at a lot of different systems.
Given this approach, this people-centered approach, what would you suggest that organizations and leaders do, like, to begin trying to put their people first? Like, how do they start?
I think there's so many things you can do, but I try to help people focus on this idea of connection.
Okay.
So there's three different types of connection that you can nurture that help people want to grow with you. And so one of those is intellectual connection. So
Mhm.
it's that whole idea, I understand what's happening and I know how I relate to it. Just rationally, logically, I get it. And I know what to focus on. So that's one piece, but also having an emotional connection. So that motivation and belief, I believe in the good of where we're going. That's a big piece of connection that people need that they're often missing. And then they also need relational connection. That is it safe to grow with people here? Is it safe to navigate this hard thing with others around me? And you could get there in a lot of different ways, but if people are missing those types of connection, you're going to see gaps and it's going to be hard to do the things you need to do to grow. So it's two-way communication runs through all of that, right? So it's foundational, but nurturing those connections is going to be the starting point.
It kind of leads me to a tangent, and I'm curious. There, in a lot of organizations, you have, members that don't interact with each other. You might have leadership that's one or two levels removed from, some team members.
Mhm.
What what do you say about that emotional connection between them if they don't even interact with each other ever? Is that part required between those groups of people who are so far removed from each other?
Not necessarily through all the layers. So, and it's hard to achieve that as you scale and you grow, right? You've got a lot more
Imagine.
people, a lot more layers. What people need is connection with those who work most closely with them. So the
Mhm.
leaders around them, the peers around them, the partners closest to them.
Yeah.
It's that idea of having a trusted circle of people.
Right.
And that is often missing when you think about top down communication. You might be hearing from a CEO, a COO, a president, somebody that might feel too distant. It's
Mhm.
hard to trust that distant voice. It doesn't mean you don't respect it,
Right.
but to
Right.
really trust it, it's hard.
Yeah.
So when you're architecting a change experience, it's always thinking through, how do I make sure the people closest to the work are surrounded by people that are trusted voices? it doesn't mean all those people have to have all the answers, but making sure they have the ability to talk through the hard things and the realities
Yeah.
and to provide clarity when there's no certainty, because we almost never have certainty.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a challenge. So when leaders don't, you know, nail it with their people when they're trying to achieve this growth, what are the consequences you see? Or like at least what are the symptoms?
I think it's some of the pain I talked about at the beginning. You start to see disengagement, kind of angst, fatigue, weariness. So you'll just see it taking a toll. You also see retention issues where people aren't
Mhm.
willing to go the distance with you, and sometimes that's just because they see it happening and poorly again and again and again and again, and there's this desire to go find something that they feel better about. I think what people see is change done out of duty and compliance. And that's that I have to do this or I should do this. And we want people to do things based on desire. I believe in the good of what we're trying to do. And that doesn't mean you have to love it all. It just means I believe it's worthwhile and I'm willing to be a part of that. That's the piece that's often missing. So you get duty and compliance, which you can run on that for a while, but it's not
Yeah.
going to keep people with you for the long haul.
Is that easy for you to spot?
Definitely. I think it's easy
Yeah.
for people to self identify
Yeah.
because, I mean, when you think about the things we're committed to in life, we can all point to things that we do out of duty or compliance. It
Right.
could be how we parent, it could be how we show up at work, it could be how we interact with a partner or spouse.
Mhm.
I should or I have to do this thing. But it makes a complete difference when you see an employee doing a thing because they believe it's worthwhile. They can push through really hard things if they know it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I I think it is pretty common to find a lot of leaders, solution jump to try and address a lot of problems, but often maybe fail to find that root cause, which is probably why they're jumping from solution to solution. Um, I'm curious if you see folks, trying to remedy these symptoms the wrong way, how do you often see, business leaders trying to fix things in a way that might not be productive or that's counterproductive? Do they often attribute these to issues to like incorrect sources or, do they wind up exacerbating the problems?
I think often they'll try to kind of dangle carrots, rewards, things like that, to keep people with them or to motivate people. But it might be encouraging the wrong behaviors. Sometimes we design rewards and compensation systems that look really attractive, but are really encouraging people to do the thing we don't want them to do, and
Interesting.
we don't understand that, and that that happens a lot in sales. If you've worked with sales teams or kind of been in that arena, we could be saying we want you to be collaborative. We want to be kind of bring our whole team to the client, but maybe you're rewarding individual behavior that
Mm,
has competing agendas. So those people don't know where to put their focus. And so they're going to lean into what gets them paid. And that's not out of selfishness, that's strategic, right? They're thinking, where should my effort go? What really is going to help me, you know, bring home the income that I need for my family?
yeah.
It's not cold hearted, but they're leaning into what's being rewarded. And that happens an awful lot. So I would say a mismatch there. There's so many other things where people might try and you talked about solution jumping. They might try and throw a solution, throw something at the wall because they're like everyone else is doing it,
Yeah.
or we're a mess. If we just implement this technology, it's going to fix it. And we know
Yeah.
that doesn't always work
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
have to be understanding the problem first before you try to solve it.
You talked about rewarding behaviors and sometimes it can be counterproductive. I don't recall all the statistics, at the moment, but I know workplace happiness, employee engagement, staff retention, and so on. They're all positively impacted when team members are asked for feedback, and gain a sense of ownership over the workplace. Is that something that you see? And maybe more importantly, like when trying to solve, I think, some of these people problems or at least diagnose them, um, are the right people involved in these conversations all the time? Or they are the wrong people trying to solve these, or the ones that actually don't have the power to move the needle? Should more team members be made to feel like stakeholders? I know there's a lot of questions. I'll let you run with that.
Sure. I would say often if we're looking at things like engagement, retention, culture, all of that, there are some kind of ideas and behind closed doors. There's always going to be
Mhm.
senior leaders, executives, people that are decision makers that are trying to figure out how do we address this. And that's a good place to start. You do need to kind of rally around what matters and what's the consequence if we don't focus on this, right? So there's some of that early stage stuff that should happen behind closed doors. But then it should be, how do we make sure we understand this kind of from a root cause issue or the people closest to the work? So, for example, if you've got engagement results and they're telling you that people feel like they don't have a voice in decision making, right?
Mhm.
Decisions are made. I don't feel like I have input or something similar to that sentiment. You have an idea that this is maybe an area that needs to be addressed, but you don't know what's really behind it and you don't
Right.
know at which level it's happening. So that's where you have to kind of dig deeper and talk to people closer to the work. And that often gets missed. We don't often do that layer of discovery. And
Mhm.
so we just come out with some really fancy action plan and people are like, that's not mine, right? That's the check the box activity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I can see why, to some degree, the effort, right, to diagnose doesn't go that deep, right? Because a lot of times there might be organizations where they simply don't put decision making power in the hands of some of those layers of employees.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're not even polled, when the reality is, they might be pulling, a disproportionate amount of weight, and maybe they should be,
Yeah. Well, and
included, at least in that conversation.
I think with that too, it's sometimes there's a maybe a fear of pushing down decisions or everyone gets a vote, kind of that, being afraid of setting a precedent for something like that. So it can be helpful to think about, can we pull together a focus group or a sampling of people, a representative group of people that can help weigh in to help guide our decisions?
Yeah. I think that input is good, right?
Mhm.
Input is great. It helps inform decisions. Obviously, there's an argument against things being too democratic.
Yeah. I think that you could be kind of that everyone gets a vote or there we need to have consensus. I think often you can't, but you can say it's kind of like getting user feedback when
Yeah.
you're thinking about technology, right? You want to know, how does it feel to experience this?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what can we learn from that, and how can that inform the things that we are choosing to do, the decisions that are made? And sometimes you can't take everything, right? You can say that's a good idea, it doesn't work in this setting and here's why, but it informs maybe the way we're thinking about it. There's
Yeah.
always the root of something good that you can build from, even if you can't do it exactly as it's been prescribed.
How else can leaders engage their team and give them a greater sense of ownership? What are the things that you would often suggest for your clients to enhance their employee experience, or to build or reinforce a people-centric culture?
I would say I'll kind of go back to that idea of autonomy and people's fingerprints being on things. We often give people, this is what we're trying to achieve. So, kind of the big picture outcome or the
Mhm.
objective, the goal, but we don't necessarily need to prescribe how they do it. There might be guidelines. Here are the
Okay.
parameters, but within that, what do you think we could do to get to this next level or to improve this process? So I would say where you can create some freedom for people to be creative, to co create with you, that's often in the how things are done. Even small bits of that make a huge difference for people because it feels like they own the thing that's
Yeah.
happening and it's not just happening to them.
Which would kind of lead me then to wonder, so you're working with a company, when they're doing it right, when it comes to their people centered leadership. What does that look like? What are the signs for leaders to know that the how is working? Are there metrics that you should monitor?
I think some of that you can see through engagement survey results, kind of what people are able to do, how much they trust their leaders, how collaborative things are.
Okay.
And that might be where you can get some quantitative data, right? You can see some numbers and you can see lift or kind of a decrease. But I think some of that is it's through understanding, it's seeing how things work in sync. So it is more qualitative. It's observing, it's talking to people, it's understanding how do things happen here. And that's when you see trust, you see people able to work through conflict. You see decisions that are able to be made without being escalated up to the top of the house, right? And
Yeah.
that doesn't happen everywhere. I know sometimes that there are just hierarchical things that prevent that. But when you start to see this co-creation of experiences and outcomes, that's a sign of health because it takes a lot of trust to do that.
I've always been weary of surveys. You
Mhm.
know, obviously when we're answering surveys, if we're at work, um, we want to be perceived in the best possible light, or maybe we don't have a lot of time and we want to get through it as quickly as possible. Um, how much confidence do we put into what we're getting back in surveys like that? Um, Part two of this sort of thought,
Mhm.
when it comes to the data around the people and the team engagement and the happiness and the culture, do you think that organizations are monitoring the right things? What things would you tell them to actually look at that they can actually measure?
And those are kind of big questions. So I'll say the survey, um, where do I start? Surveys in general, I think they give us a good lens into just perception. It doesn't give
Okay.
us like the deep dive. It just says this is how people are feeling, but you don't know why. You don't know how, unless they've put, written a paragraph comment or like given you a lot of meat to work with. But I think that they're a good place to start because they say this is a perception. It doesn't mean it's based on fact. It's just how people are feeling. And that's important to understand because it tells you where you need to dig deeper or where things are going well. But it's just a data point. It's never going to give you all the context that you need. So I think you have to
Mhm.
think through how else can we understand this. So, for example, I've worked with leaders, and they've sometimes leaders will think they're amazing, and everybody loves them, and they'll get back a result that says they're not a good listener, right, or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that. And they're like, I don't understand this, and they might want to throw out the result and say that's not valid. My people love me,
Yeah.
but a survey can help you to say there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
It's not a judgment on your intention. It's not necessarily based on fact, but it tells you that there's a disconnect between how you perceive yourself and how things are received by your team. We want to understand that gap and bridge it.
I'm curious,
Mhm.
how can leaders get better with this? Are there tools and platforms that can be beneficial here?
You might be a little bit more of an expert on that than I am. I would say a lot of it is through it's being transparent about the thing you're trying to get better at. I understand that it's kind of the idea. I understand that the listening that you want to be listened to and heard more, and it doesn't feel like that. I'm trying to work on this. Here's what I'm doing. And it's inviting that feedback, right? So some of that is leader to team.
Yeah.
It's being transparent about the thing. Um, I think that you can also have other people kind of check in 360s. You can get a pulse check. Those, again, are kind of tools and measures. I think that a lot of it is really through the conversations that you have, though, that things are landing well with your team. But I think there's whole consultancies and tools designed around helping to measure culture. I think we just have to think about, and this is kind of part two of your previous question, the how do you measure culture?
Yeah.
I think that you have to think about how you're defining culture in the first place. Because culture could be aspirational. Here's who we as a company say we are, and this is what it's like to work here. But there's also kind of the authentic culture. This is what really happens.
Yeah.
And those can be very different. And then even at the team level, you could have a subculture. But this was what happens in IT.
Yeah.
Or,
Right.
you have all of these different things. So having one measure for culture sometimes isn't going to give you a true reflection. So there has to be some qualitative understanding. It can't all be numbers.
It can't all be numbers, and there is going to be a different dynamic, based on the team makeup and your location, or
Mhm.
variety of other factors that kind of go into it. The concept of subculture, I think about a lot when it comes to larger organizations. Um, Curious about the tech thing, and how it's sort of changing, evolving. Do you see it, playing a role in your own work? Changing and evolving. Will your clients need something different? The workforce, any trends, or predictions there?
I would say a lot deeper understanding of AI is that's important to all of my clients, and there's some that are kind of on all ends of the spectrum. People are leaning really into it. Some people are like dabbling, and some people
Yeah.
are fearful. It's everywhere. But I think understanding how to use it well to optimize the work that you're doing, not to replace it. So that's a piece of it, but it's also understanding, do we have tools where that there's an AI component that can help us to think different. So that's one piece. But I think because I work with a lot of smaller companies, small to mid-size is mostly where I'm at, a lot of people have the wrong technology to try and do the thing they're doing.
Hmm.
And they don't know what they don't know. And I think the need to understand, kind of to identify what are the needs, what are the things we're trying to solve for and understand, so we can select the right tech stack for that, right?
Yeah.
So we have the right mix of tools to get us there. That piece is often missing because when you're small, you're just grabbing the thing you need, right?
Right.
I need a scheduling tool. I need something for payroll. I need something for benefits. And you've got this big pile of things that sometimes aren't designed to fit together, and they create more complexity. So I think it's not necessarily the technology, but it's understanding, how do I choose the right things for my growth stage?
Is that a big part of the consulting that you do? I mean, in organizational design, and that people, the design for humans, right? Like we talked about before, is this a big part of what you do when you work with leaders to help, better design that organization, looking to their tech stack and seeing how everything's working together and making recommendations for what fits better?
To a point, but I would say at some point I lean into experts because this is not my area of expertise. So because in org design you look at systems,
Hmm.
you're asking questions about the user experience.
Right.
Kind of, what does it feel like to work here, to navigate processes, to navigate systems? So you're trying to get a sense for, is it seamless? Is it clunky? Like, what's hard? And I through that process often understand that there are some serious tech issues, things that are making it a lot harder to do the work and to work with other people. So I will make recommendations around that. Or it might be ways to optimize the systems they're using. But oftentimes that means bringing in a partner to
Right.
say, at this stage, if you're in agreement that this is a place we need to prioritize, we need to bring in a partner to help guide us. Because I have limited experience with technologies, right? But I can identify the gap
Hmm.
and gain some alignment around addressing it.
Yeah. Interesting. So, looking towards the future, I mean, do you see people related, insight or people centric skill, competency that tomorrow's leaders will have to develop in order to thrive? Possibly more than one of these things that maybe today or yesterday's leaders didn't.
I don't know that they're new, but I would say curiosity is something that I think people need to practice more. So, because a lot of times leaders don't lean into that. They're maybe giving answers and directing and doing a lot more of that, and not doing as much listening and asking. So I would say if somebody's looking to kind of lead in the future or trying to position themselves, it's understanding, kind of how do I ask the right questions to involve people and to understand context. And part of that is critical thinking, which is kind of the second thing I'd say. I think that's important just in general in the world. But it's this idea that context matters, right?
Yeah.
That you have to be able to ask the right questions to understand the issue before you start trying to solve for it or addressing it. So those two pieces stand out to me quite a bit for like just critical leadership pieces that sometimes are missing.
You mentioned being leading with curiosity, which I think directly impacts that. One of those 3 points you mentioned, that emotional relatability. If you're talking to people, whether they're your superiors or subordinates, whether they're just your team members, in any capacity, asking questions and just trying to learn more, I think, and understand, positions you, I think, very well in terms of relationship building.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think sometimes we can make a lot of assumptions around how people ended up where they are, to how they came to a conclusion or why they did a thing. We often don't understand what's behind it. So
Right.
there have been times where I've seen a behavior that made no sense to me. If I were to like logically think it through, I'm like, how in the world did they end up there? But when you ask the question and you just say, talk about your thought process, kind of how did you work through this? And then I can understand sometimes people are making decisions based on old maps of what was expected in the past or allowed in the past. So they might be playing it safe. They might be self-protecting. They
Mhm.
might have a whole different idea of what the priorities are. You
Yeah.
never know
Yeah.
what it is, but when you start asking the question, you can see, oh, here's where we're aligned, or maybe it's okay that they're thinking differently, or maybe there's something that's off track and I need to help
Right.
bring us back.
Yeah. Being able to identify where those lines don't connect. I'll often ask my 6-year-old these questions, and find a mind mapping that is all over the place, where nothing nothing connects. At least in my mind, it doesn't connect. In hers, it does.
Yeah.
Um, but no, that's a good example, and I think it happens a lot, right? Because if there is miscommunication anywhere along the way, right, where there's that divergence, right, in understanding, I think is going to lead somebody potentially down a path that's far disconnected from anyone else, and unless you know exactly where that is, you'll have no idea how they got there.
Well, and I think some people also they create it out of necessity because maybe they haven't been given enough information to help them know where to focus. And in the absence of certainty or clarity, our brain starts to create it
Yeah.
because the brain reads it as an error message that needs to be resolved.
Right.
So if I don't know what to do, I'm going to like make up my own narrative, my own story, and I'm going to fill in the gaps with speculation. And I might land in a completely different place than where I should be.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a survival mechanism. Our
Yeah.
brain is trying to make right what doesn't feel complete. And then we end up landing in a place that people don't understand.
So if an entrepreneur asks you for, your single most important piece of advice about what they can do better as a leader, right? You're in an elevator with them, and you have just that amount of time until they get to the top, and they want to know what they can do better when it comes to their people. What do you say when you just have that minute?
I would focus in on how important relationship and connection are. That it's good for people to understand kind of the big picture of what we're trying to do as a company, but if they can't connect to it and to each other, you're going to limit your potential. So if you're going to put your energy anywhere, it's on building connections between ideas and people.
Between ideas and people. That's great. That actually needs to be on a meme somewhere. Um, awesome. Summer, thank you. This is great. I appreciate you joining me today. I'm grateful to have you here.
Well, this has been great. It's a lot of fun to nerd out on all of this with somebody who's like-minded and in the same space.
Yep, and came from the same place too. Let's not forget our music roots.
That's right.
Um, Also, big thanks to all of you for tuning in to Mustard Hub Voices Behind the Build. Please like and share this episode. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and visit mustardhub.com to learn how we can help companies become the destination for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. Until next time.